So you wanna know what the heck is a platoon, a company, a division? I'm gonna explain that for you right here. What's up friends, I am US Army veteran Christopher Chaos, and I have gotten many requests to explain what is a company, what is a brigade, and all those different terminologies that's used in US Army organization for unit sizes. So that's what we're gonna talk about. Just be aware that there is gonna be some discrepancies here and there with different units, especially like smaller specialty units may have some differences in some of the terminology that I'm gonna talk about and some of the size structure, but for the most part, it's generally a video that's intended for someone on the outside looking in to get just a general idea of what the heck are they talking about when I'm watching these cool Army videos, or I'm watching these Army movies, or whatever it is that you may have find yourself trying to figure out what the heck are they talking about when they're talking about a company or a brigade or a division or whatever the case may be in those circumstances. So let's get started with one of the lower levels of kind of the categorization of sizes and everything, and that is a team. Not everybody's gonna have a team. For example, when I was in transportation, we don't have teams, but mainly this is kind of a common terminology that's used with like infantry for one example. And you may hear different terminology like a fire team or just simply a team, and that's usually how it may be used. Now in my platoon, the last one that I was in, we kind of had teams. We usually had 2 teams and I was the section sergeant, but let me break down what the heck a team is first. Now a team commonly may be something like 4 soldiers. Usually it'll be led by a sergeant, maybe even a corporal, and probably maybe in some circumstances maybe even by a specialist if maybe that specialist knows what the heck they're doing. Now moving up from there, you usually have a squad, which usually consists of 2 teams. So then you usually have a squad leader who can be like a sergeant, maybe a staff sergeant, it depends on the unit sometimes. And then under that person has the 2 teams with 2 team leaders that are, like I said before, either maybe like a sergeant or a corporal, maybe a high-speed specialist, and those teams work for that specific squad leader to make up a whole squad, making up for those 2 teams, combining together to make a squad. And typically the squad sizes can be about 9 soldiers. That's the 2 4-man teams plus the addition of that squad leader. Now from there you can have what's called a section, but some platoons, which I'll talk about in a little bit, don't necessarily have sections, they just have squads. And a section can have maybe 12, 24 soldiers inside of that section. Sometimes it can be made up of, say, like 2 squads that make a full section. And if a platoon does have like a specific section, then it may be led by a sergeant or maybe a staff sergeant. Now, like I said, not all platoons are gonna have this. I've had platoons that do have sections and I've had platoons that don't have sections. For example, we had 2 squads in one platoon that I was in where we were the ammo section. And so you had one squad of about 9 soldiers and then a second squad of 9 soldiers, but both squads were part of that ammo section. Moving up from the section size, you then go to a platoon. Now, platoon can be anywhere from 42 soldiers and up, sometimes even less. It just depends on the unit, really. Because manning of personnel could be less from one platoon going over to another unit to another platoon. So those sizes can really vary, but typically a platoon is made up of something like maybe 2, 3 sections, 4 squads, something like that. It kind of can vary. Most typical platoons that I've been in usually are made up of 4 or 5 squads. And that platoon will be led by what is called a platoon sergeant. And a platoon sergeant can vary based on the unit. Sometimes you may see an E6 acting as a platoon sergeant. A little bit more commonly, units prefer to have an E7 act as the platoon sergeant, but like I said, it's gonna vary based on the different units. But then along with that platoon sergeant, you're also gonna have an officer that leads that platoon along with it, and that would be usually like a second lieutenant or a first lieutenant that is your platoon leader. And that platoon sergeant and that platoon leader work together doing different kind of tasks and different jobs to lead that platoon. Moving up from there, you go to a company. Now that terminology can change based on the type of unit. For example, an artillery unit will have a battery, a cav unit may have a troop. Those 2 different terminologies are all the same as a company. So you may have company, troop, or battery. I don't think there's anything else. I think those are the 3 ones, but if I'm forgetting something off the top of my head, just leave comments down below. Now a company can vary in sizes, maybe anywhere from like 60 to 100 soldiers. It is really gonna depend on the unit, really. But inside that company is where you have multiple platoons. So as an example, I've had companies where maybe we have 5, 6 platoons that are inside of that company. And each company has a different role. Like for example, a lot of units that I was in, you had maybe a transportation platoon, you had a maintenance platoon, you had the DFAC platoon, and all those different platoons that as a whole made up that company or that troop or that battery. In charge of those companies or troops or batteries, you would have a first sergeant. And then the first sergeant has a captain that is the company commander. Now, don't get it all mixed around if you're saying, oh no, it's the company commander that has the first sergeant. I'm just trying to give the general understanding. You're gonna have a first sergeant, you're gonna have a captain, and those two have different roles in that company in being in charge of it. You may see some cases where maybe a company does not have an acting first sergeant, and they may have, like in E7, a sergeant first class that is filling in as the first sergeant, and soldiers in that company will still often refer to that individual as first sergeant, even though they are a sergeant first class or whatever the case might be. But because of the role and the position they are in, it is common that soldiers will call that person first sergeant because they are in a first sergeant position. Moving up from there, you then have a battalion, or with a cav unit, you're gonna have a squadron. You may also have heard the word squadron being used with Air Force, but their terminology is gonna differ from the Army, but in the Army, squadron is used when we're talking about a cav unit. Now, battalion might have 300 to 1,000 soldiers, it's gonna depend based on the unit, but from multiple companies now combined to make that battalion. So you may have Alpha Company, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, Delta Company, all these companies, and combined, they make up that battalion as a whole. Now, that battalion or squadron is typically going to be led by a lieutenant colonel, which will be their battalion or squadron commander. Just like with the other roles, that lieutenant colonel is the officer piece of that battalion or squadron, you would also have a sergeant major that is the NCO piece of that battalion or squadron. Now, going up from there is a regiment, but it's not really widely used. It's only really used for certain circumstances, such as a cav unit. Now, one of the units I was in, 30th CR, is a cav unit, and it did have regiments, but it's not a widely used thing, and it would typically be also led by a lieutenant colonel. So we're gonna move on from there and go up to a brigade. A brigade is typically made up from 3 battalions. That brigade is commonly led by a brigadier general on the officer side, and then a sergeant major on the NCO side. Now, moving up from a brigade, you then go to a division. Now, a division would commonly be made up of something maybe like 3 brigades. And that division commander is typically going to be a major general, and then on the NCO side you still have a sergeant major. Now, before I know someone's going to correct me on it and say that it's a command sergeant major, I'm just kind of generally referring to it as a sergeant major. I know that probably at a division level or even at a brigade level or whatever, it's going to be a command sergeant major, not just a regular sergeant major. I'm just, used to calling it sergeant major because that's how you typically address them. Whether they are a sergeant major or a command sergeant major, you're typically addressing them as sergeant major. So there are 2 more levels kind of above it. I'm not gonna get in depth with those because now we're really getting up there in the organization. And the next one up is Corps and then Field Army. Those are gonna be the much larger unit levels that really gets up there. I'm sure most people that are kind of curious about some of the terminology are really concerned up to maybe a division, maybe even a little bit lower than that. But I hope that kind of helps out with some of the terminology you may see in movies or hear other people kind of mentioning and kind of clear some things up for you. Hopefully you found the video helpful in some ways. If so, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you want to add some more in-depth explanation for anybody watching this video to read in the comments, please feel free to leave some comments. If you want to check out some more videos from me, maybe check out these guys over here that are recommended. And if you are new, maybe hit that subscribe button down there. I'm Christopher Chaos, and I will see you next time. See ya.